Thank you for joining us. I'd like to welcome everyone to today's webinar, Managing Transient Cyber Assets and Removable Media to Facilitate Compliance with NERC CIP Requirements. Today, utilities are seeking ways to improve compliance with regulatory requirements pertaining to the Mitigation of Malicious Code for transient cyber assets and removable media. In addition to high and medium impact BES cyber systems that are currently in scope, new security management controls have gone into effect for low impact BES cyber systems on January 1st, 2020. Utility personnel and vendors extensively use transient cyber assets such as laptops and removable media to accomplish their daily work, such as preventative maintenance and system repairs. This webinar will provide an explanation of the NERC CIP requirements, as well as the implications of manual and automated mitigation strategies. We'll also introduce you to OPSWAT's purpose-built tools that facilitate compliance with these requirements and improve your overall security posture through malware mitigation. This webinar is scheduled for 30 minutes, and at this time I'd like to introduce our presenters. Joining us is Carl Perman, an expert in CIP compliance. Carl has more than 25 years of experience creating, evaluating, and implementing compliance programs for electric utilities and power generation companies. He also has expertise in a wide range of regulations, including FERC and NERC. Carl's also served as an audit resource and subject matter expert for CIP and reliability audits, and he has also written 4 books on NERC operations and planning compliance. Carl will be joined by Frank Dye, Director of Engineering at OPSWAT. Frank is a subject matter expert who advises nuclear operators on regulatory compliance, particularly with the recent release of NEI 1808. So now I'd like to hand the webinar over to Carl and Frank. Welcome, gentlemen.
Thanks, Doug. Appreciate that. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everybody, depending upon where you're at. As Doug mentioned, so today we're going to talk about removable media and transient cyber assets, particularly with an emphasis on NERC CIP. So basically what I'm going to talk about is the NERC CIP requirements that pertain to transient cyber assets and removable media, some examples of malicious code mitigation strategies, and then talk about some tools to facilitate compliance and improve security posture. And also Frank's going to help me out with that with some single-purpose products that are built for mitigation malware, particularly related to transient cyber assets and removable media. And then as Doug said, we're going to leave 5 to 10 minutes there for questions. Next slide, please. Okay, NERC CIP requirements. I mean, transient cyber are relatively low in the world of NERC CIP for the last about 4 years. Really started focusing with second version of NERC CIP 10. It got added in there with some of the change management as well as the vulnerability assessment. It was in the previous version of CIP 10. And CIP 10 version 2 went into effect back in 2016, July of 2016. For the high and medium impact BES cyber systems, and BES is bulk electric system. These things, I'm sure everybody's seen them before if you have high and medium impact systems in your environment. We'll talk about low in a second. So transient cyber assets, basically there's a few different parts of this. The first part is for those TCAs or transient cyber assets that are managed by the responsible entity. The responsible entity would be those of you that have mandatory compliance requirements under the NERC, under your NERC registration or under the NERC functional model, like generation owner, transmission owner, generation operator, generation owner, balancing authority, reliability coordinator, all those kind of good things. And so basically there's 5 areas, and again, we're not going to go too deep into this because we could easily spend a few hours on this. But again, just to hit kind of the high points, broken down into 4 different requirements for those TCAs that are managed by those that are responsible entities or have these compliance obligations. The first is to manage. That can be individually or in groups. To authorize, much the same manner, it can be individually or in groups. Software vulnerability mitigation, malicious code mitigation, and then basically managing use, so unauthorized use mitigation. The next standard applies to transient cyber, the next requirement applies to transient cyber assets managed by a party other than the responsible entity. So these could be vendors, contractors, those that basically bring transient cyber assets, i.e. laptops, those kind of things, into your environments that basically you don't manage. You You don't give them a laptop issued from the entity. You basically let them bring in a laptop from their own. Either they own it as a contractor, perhaps, or their company. They're employed by, say, a GE, Schneider, et cetera, a vendor in that space, and they bring that laptop into your environment, through their own use as well as their company use. There's two areas that you need to be aware of for those types of assets: software vulnerability mitigation and malicious code mitigation. And then as far as removal media, it doesn't matter if it's your removal media or someone else's removal media. If it's coming in and touching a VES cyber asset, particularly for CIP 10, high or medium impact VES cyber systems, basically you have to have those media have to be authorized, and you also have to have some type of malicious code mitigation steps for that removable media touches or is hooked into your VES cyber systems at the high or medium impact. Okay, so this is relatively newer. So the Transient cyber asset and removal media requirements have now come into scope for NERC CIP 003 as of 1/1/20. So that basically applies to those of you with low impact VES cyber systems. And so that's relatively new, just here in the beginning of the month. And again, some of the same language you'll see, but a little bit less onerous, but still an area of challenge for many utilities. And again, just to go through the requirements, for Transient cyber assets managed by those of you that have these compliance obligations, the low impact for your VES cyber systems, you have to have malicious code mitigation program or steps, some methodology for malicious code mitigation. For Transient cyber assets managed by a party other than you or those responsible entities, such as your vendors and contractors, again, you have to have a malicious code mitigation program. And then for removable media, you have to have a method to detect malicious code and mitigation of the threat detected, and then also a malicious code mitigation methodology.
And Carl, I wondered if you could explain to some of the laymen out there, what would be an example of transient cyber asset?
So good question, Douglas. So basically a transient cyber asset in most common terms is a laptop. And we'll get into some definitions on upcoming slide, but this is a laptop that could be managed for field use that's either used by, say, an instrumentation tech or electrical tech or protection equipment folks, protective testing folks, or a vendor that's doing maintenance administrative duties on your protection equipment or your energy management system or SCADA system out in the field. And again, I'll get into the formal NERC definitions, but they're basically temporarily installed devices that basically perform diagnostics, updates, and even sometimes used for vulnerability assessments. So basically a form of a computer that's tied to a VES cyber system for less than a 30-day period. Okay, so we'll get into the formal definitions here. And basically, as I mentioned, formal out of the NERC glossary of terms, which is the kind of the Bible for NERC. Transient cyber asset is a cyber asset that is capable of transmitting or transferring executable code not included in a VES cyber system, not a protected cyber asset, associated with high or medium impact VES cyber systems, and directly connected for 30 consecutive calendar days or less to a VES cyber asset, a network within an ESP containing higher impact VES cyber systems, or a protected cyber asset associated with higher medium impact VES cyber systems. Examples of transient cyber assets include, but are not limited to, cyber assets used for data transfer, vulnerability assessment, maintenance, or troubleshooting purposes. And as I just talked about, and kind of to Doug's question, we see these many times, and those of you that are in the industry see these often with your own techs that are doing setting file updates, kind of firmware updates, patching, could be vulnerability testing, maintenance, troubleshooting of protective systems, as well as energy management systems, industrial controls that actually are keeping the electricity generating and transmitting in our generation stations and transmission substations that are out. So very common to see that. Our techs that work for regulated entities, as well as many vendors and contractors in this space. So the definition, again, out of the NERC glossary of terms for removable media, is storage media that is not cyber asset. It's capable of transferring executable code and can be used to store, copy, move, or assess data, and is directly connected for 30 consecutive calendar days or less, all that other kind of good stuff. But bottom line is these are floppy disks, compact disks, USB flash drives, external hard drives, and flash memory cards drives that contain a non-volatile memory. So many times we'll see these in use because techs carry their setting files. They carry some proprietary software. They may carry diagnostic software. They may carry some type of vulnerability assessment tools on these removable media sticks, flash drives, etc. And they use that in combination with a TCA or in conjunction with a TCA or your own industrial control systems to conduct their work on either maintenance or testing or vulnerability analysis of those controls out in the field or in a plant or substation.
This is Frank. We're going to go back one slide. We had a question back on transient cyber assets and your definition there. The question from the field is, this doesn't seem to really cover low impact systems. And keep me honest here, I believe they just changed some of the requirements around low impact systems in regards to scanning for malicious code.
So remember, this does focus on low as well, because what it's saying is these are things that it's not. So basically it's not a PCA and it's not an ESP, and those two terms are associated with only high and medium impact systems. There are no PCAs or ESPs within the low impact environment. So what does all this mean, right? So you heard a lot of different things: manage, authorize, mitigation, software mitigation, all these things. So again, try to just get this into plain English, if you would, or real world explanation. So what's the purpose of all this talk? And what are these standards, CIP 10 as well as, well, CIP 10, the part about TCAs and removable media, and CIP 3, the section about removable media and transient cyber assets. The purpose is to document and implement a plan to mitigate the risk of malicious code introduction to BES cyber systems. So basically protecting your BES cyber systems from someone coming in with a memory stick or a flash drive or a laptop that's already affected with some type of virus, and then polluting your environment through an RTU or through even a relay or some other instrumentation that's out there in the field. And that can be done, sounds pretty simple when we talk about it here on this webinar, but I know this is tough, and I see people struggling with this on a daily basis because there's a lot of these that are out there. And those of you who have large environments, you've got a lot of your own people as well as a lot of vendors in your space, and they're scattered throughout North America. So totally understand that this is difficult. But for transient cyber assets, basically it boils down to these things. You need to know what's out there, the TCAs that you manage. You should know who in your staff has access to your instrumentation through the use of a temporary lab. You need to know any TCAs that assess your assets. So basically, if people, visitors, if you would, or contractors, vendors, et cetera, whatever you may want to call them, non-standard authorized folks, they have to be managed, their access is managed. But basically, you need to know those vendors and contractors, transient cyber assets that are going to be hooking into your assets that are out there, your BES cyber systems. You have to have a malicious code mitigation strategy. So that can be done in a lot of different ways, but you have to have a strategy and you have to implement that strategy. And we'll talk a little bit about those strategies in a second. And then a good practice, right? This is not required, but on the TCAs, but you should have some type of malicious code prevention and detection strategy. So although you have to have a malicious code mitigation strategy, I often look at mitigation as kind of somewhat after the fact. Occasionally, people would spend a lot of time on incident handling or mitigation handling, where oftentimes the malicious code prevention detection up front is missed, so that proactive stance. So I think a good combination of proactive and defensive measures, you should take a good look at that and judge that for yourself, but oftentimes that can be a good strategy to focus on both prevention and detection. Some examples of strategies that we've seen out there. Some entities have just said, hey, no TCAs. No one's going to use transient cyber assets anymore. I'm not sure how practical that is in most field environments, just because of the plethora of these transient cyber assets that are out there. But that's one way that you could do this. You could have a policy-driven statement that says no TCAs. Only trusted devices. So we've seen people have to use the registered or the regulated entities laptops, or kind of a laptop behind glass. When the vendor comes on site, they basically have to get access to that locked up laptop and then use that laptop that's already equipped with antivirus, et cetera. Another would be to agree on an antivirus with the vendor up front and to make sure that's run and it's updated. all that kind of good stuff. And then the last thing is some type of registration and scanning, and we'll get into that, but like a kiosk-based system that has some self-contained registration and scanning tools available so that when someone comes into the environment, they have to plug into that first and then carry on their duties from there. Removal media. Again, you have to have malicious code mitigation strategy. You should have some type of request process so someone's not just running out to Best Buy or grandma's house to get the removable media stick. There should be some type of request process to get that from the regulated entity or from the appropriate vendor. But there should be some type of tracking and authorization of the removable media for field use versus for personal use as well as business use. A good practice would be to designate removable media for focused work. So setting file changes, firmware updates, sequence of events downloads, etc. So basically to designate removable media for engineering purposes, for field instrumentation purposes, for protected system testing and maintenance purposes, those kind of things, and dedicate those and designate those media for those purpose-built functions. Again, some examples of strategies that we've seen out there. Again, a policy-driven statement saying no removable media, just none in the environment. Only trusted media, so media that have basically been authorized and scanned and then designated for that work. Only trusted files. Frank's going to talk a little bit about that, but basically files that have been scanned and are acceptable, then can be downloaded into your environment. And then again, a registration and scanning capability. There's some tools that are out there, and again, I'll let Frank explain those in a minute, but there's a tool that can be used for registration and scanning of that removable media. Can be kiosk driven as well, but basically before someone plugs into a BES cyber system, they go through that registration and scanning, antivirus and malware checks before it's hooked into your systems. Okay, with that, I'll turn it over to Frank.
Thanks, Carl. Yeah, so I mean, Carl spoke to the high-level requirements, which in this case are focused really on removable media and transient cyber assets. Here at OPSWAT, we've really sort of strived to build solutions that factor into existing workflows so that you don't have to go to that sort of nuclear option of just banning removable media or banning transient cyber assets. The first one is the MetaDefender kiosk line here. You can see a picture of the K3000, which is our flagship unit for this line. It's designed as a removable media scanning station so that integrates with our MetaDefender technology, scans with upwards of 20 commercial AVs along with some of our own proprietary technology. And then if you notice, there's multiple types of media ports and things. So it allows you to transfer that media from maybe an unknown piece of removable media, transfer those files from an unknown piece of removable media to a known one. And that way you can sort of step up your level of trust about bringing certain components into your facility. It's designed to be standalone for air-gapped and highly secure environments, or it can work in a conjunction with some of our other products to sort of be a little bit more lower maintenance cost, a little bit easier to manage from a facility standpoint. The second product that is relatively new in this case for our product line is MetaDefender Drive. We designed it to deal with the common problem we are hearing around vendor laptops, other kinds of transient cyber assets, and how to take them from a sort of an unknown state into more of a trusted level where you have some knowledge of what's contained on that laptop before you let it into your secure facility. MetaDefender Drive is a self-contained USB drive. It runs a small Linux system and actually boots off that laptop or transient cyber asset and then mounts the appropriate drives in a read-only fashion and begins its analysis, again, using the OPSWAT MetaDefender technology. This particular MetaDefender drive was designed with CIP in mind. So I know some of you have limitations on what USBs can be brought into your facility. This one is a digitally signed firmware. It uses FIPS epoxy, so it's tamper resistant. And then, of course, it's TAA compliant. So you have some assurances in the supply chain. And then this talk isn't really focused on that, but I did want to briefly show a slide showing the sort of plethora of products in the OPSWAT portfolio here. we really try and take our product line to deal with all the challenges moving from sort of like a secure facility to maybe more of an enterprise zone or an office environment. And of course, we'd be happy to talk about any unique challenges you may have in your organization. Excellent. So, Carl, I think that's going to wrap up for this. But I think prior to that, we wanted to do about a little bit of Q&A here. Did anyone have any questions or anything?
So I want to remind the attendees, if you have a question, just enter it into the Q&A tab. There we go.
Yeah, so the question is, are these products made to order? How can you send one out and set it up? And so, while these products are product lines from OPSWAT, they're made in sort of a universal product line, and then each one is highly customizable. So in the case of MetaDefender Kiosk, as I mentioned, it can work in an air-gapped environment. It can, where, you basically are sneaker netting removable media around the facility. And then we also can network access. So you can use things like our MetaDefender Vault, so it can transfer files, and you can cut removable media out of your facility. In that case, maybe lowering or heightening your security posture there. Excellent. Any other questions out there? So the question is, how is the USB device kept updated and documented for compliance? And Chris, I believe you're referring to the MetaDefender drive. Is that correct? Well, I'm going to assume that he's referring to the MetaDefender drive there. The MetaDefender drive can be updated in terms of the malware engines, either through our network access, our cloud update infrastructure, or you can connect it to our central management product in your intranet, and then the drives would receive their updates from that. And then using some other tools that we have available, you can download those update packages from an internet connected environment. You would then likely scan them through something like the kiosk before bringing them into the secure facility, and then they would be propagated to your drives. That way you get the updates to things like the commercial AVs that it incorporates. Any other questions out there? Once again, if anyone has some questions maybe they don't want to make public, our emails for both myself and Carl Perman are there. We'll be happy to take this offline. Happy to answer anything one-on-one.
Great. Thank you very much, Carl and Frank. So that concludes today's webinar. This last slide, which will be sent out, and a recording will be made available as well. So thank you very much for joining us, and have a great day.